So now the art and culture of Palas. After the end of the Gupta Empire, a lot of regional styles started to develop in the Indian art. Bengal में the Pala period introduced a new school of art which had its own characteristics and that continued for a few centuries. It was practiced in a large area that covered modern day Bengal, Bihar, and parts of Assam. So, this new school of art came to be known as the Eastern Indian School of Medieval Art or simply Pala School of Art. So, Palas के टाइम पे different various stupas, chaityas, temples, and forts were constructed, and Palas were basically devout Buddhists. Right? Various like a lot of buildings have vanished and leaving no extant architecture from this period, and it makes it very difficult to reconstruct a very systematic overview of the architectural development during the Pala times. So most of the architectures of the Pala times were religious. The first 200 years of Pala period art were more dominated by Buddhist art, and the last 200 years Hindu art came to dominate. Among the various Mahaviharas, Nalanda, Vikramshila, Sompura are a few notable ones. So Dharmapala was the one who built the Vikramshila Mahavihara, and that is in Bihar. Pala sculpture की अगर हम बात करें तो that was so the Pala's sculpture. When we talk about sculpture in the Pala age, as I said, Palas were Buddhists by faith, but they greatly encouraged the expression of sculptures which found stimulus in religion. So the religious art, in the religious art, all the sculpture during this period were of idols of gods and goddesses, and they had no actual connection with the societal or the practical life of the people at that particular point of time. And the sculptures of this time inevitably reflected the religious experiences of the past centuries. यहाँ पर एक iconographic type of deities बनाए जाते थे. That means that kind of those kind of deities that were laid down in the religious texts, deities having features as laid down in the religious texts, and that had to be followed by the artists, and that could not be altered much except a few minor details. And यहाँ पर in this Pala times, patronage was not so much by the court. Generally, Pala art and sculpture were sponsored not so much by the court or the aristocracy, but it was sponsored mostly by rich individuals of the society. तो ये affluent class के लोग क्या करते थे इस time पे? To earn religious merit, to earn religious merit for donating these sculptures depended on artists to make it, and then they used to patronize this. So the affluent class, it was rather sculpture, Pala sculpture in the Pala era was more so sponsored by the rich individuals of the society, not so much, not per se by the courts. Material यहाँ पे जो use किया जाता था, it was mostly black stone, or what is also known as the kasti patthar for carving sculptures. So as you can see here, and metal images were also casted in bronze, and bronze sculpture tradition जो है Palas का, it is famous for the use of 8 metals, जिसको बुलाया जाता है as अष्टधातु. That is famous. Pala time का that is famous. That tradition, bronze sculpture tradition of Palas is famous for Ashtadhatu. So the Pala school of painting की अगर हम बात करें, so the earliest examples of miniature painting in India exist in the form of illustrations to the religious texts on Buddhism executed under the Palas of Eastern India and Jain texts executed in Western India during the 11th and 12th centuries AD. Pala period basically also saw the last great phase of Buddhist art in India. Monasteries like Nalanda, Vikramshila, Somrup, Udantapuri were all great centers of Buddhist learning and art. A lot of manuscripts were illustrated, and the deities were basically Vajrayana Buddhist deities, and the themes on palm leaves. So numerous manuscripts were illustrated with Vajrayana Buddhist deities and themes on palm leaves. So if you remember, um it was in the 8th century somewhere that the Vajrayana school developed as an offshoot of the Mahayana school. So mostly यहाँ पे Vajrayana Buddhist deities को ही illustrate किया जाता था. There was a tradition of sculpture making in bronze, like I said, bronze से बनाया जाता था Pala dynasty में. Students came to monasteries from all of South and Southeast Asia for education and religious instruction during the Pala period. So क्योंकि ये students ये monasteries में आए थे during the Pala era, that is students from Southeast Asia, from South Asia. So what they did was they took back specimens of Pala Buddhist art in the form of the illustrated manuscripts, in the form of bronze statues, and इसकी वजह से Pala art जो है, this got dispersed. This enabled the dispersal of Pala art to places like Tibet, Burma, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and Java. So इस particular Pala school of painting के features ये थे कि the lines that were used, there were flowing and sinus lines that were used, and the colors that were used were subdued color tones were used. यानी कि not very bright, soft and restrained colors were used, and the style here is a very naturalistic style that looks like the ideal forms of the bronze statues that prevailed at that particular time. जो bronze statues में form use किया जाता था, उसी तरीके का painting they used to make the bronze statues of that particular time. So these paintings also resembled those forms that were used in those bronze statues and stone sculptures, and the looks were, so we can say, inspired from the classical art of Ajanta. As far as the important text is concerned from this period, from the Pala period, one very important text here is this: Astra Sahasrika Pragna Paramita. If this is the pronunciation, Astra Sahasrika Pragna Paramita. So this stands for perfection of wisdom, and this is written in 8,000 lines. This is said to be the finest example of Pala Buddhist palm leaf manuscript, and it was written at Nalanda during the rule of the Pala king Rampala towards the end of the 11th century. Now we look at the Indo-Islamic architecture. इसकी शुरुआत हुई थी सल्तनत आर्किटेक्चर के साथ. Actually speaking, its beginning was the Indo-Islamic architecture का beginning was marked by Muslims of Gujarat and Sindh who had begun the construction work in the 8th century itself. But it was only in the 13th century that building activity on a large scale began to take place by the Turkish state. That is the Delhi Sultanate, beginning with the slave dynasty or the Mamluk dynasty established by Qutbuddin Aibak. उसके बाद इस्लामिक आर्किटेक्चर में कई सारे लोकल इन्फ्लुएंसेस आए, एंड फिर अपने जो इनके जो खुद के प्रैक्टिसेस थे दैट गॉट अमैलगमेटेड विद इट, एंड देन अपना एक यूनिक स्टाइल बन के आया. So we will now discuss the Indo Saracenic, or what we can also call the Indo Islamic architecture. So it is basically a mix of many techniques, stylized shapes, and surface decorations that have evolved through a continuous amalgamation of architectural elements from various styles. So different styles that were there. First one is the imperial style, that is the style of the Delhi Sultanate, that is the Sultanate architecture. And then provincial style yani ki that existed at the provincial level, like in Bengal, in Jaipur, Mandu, Gujarat. Then the Mughal style, that is in Delhi, Agra, Lahore. And then Deccan style, such as in Bijapur, Golconda. So as far as the Indo-Islamic architecture is concerned, or what is also known as the Indo Saracenic architecture is concerned, uh, we'll look at a few features of this particular Indo Islamic architecture. So it was in this Islamic architecture, or the Indo Islamic architecture, that the use of these arches and domes became prominent. It was in this period, and this is known as the arcuate style. ठीक है, तो यहाँ पे आर्चेस एंड डोम्स का यूज जो है वो प्रोमिनेंट हो गया. And this particular style, that is the arcuate style, replaced the Trebite style or the Indian architecture, the traditional Trebite style of architecture. तो यहाँ पर Trebite style of architecture का prominent feature ये था कि जो entrance था, that was characterized by lintel, यानी कि इस तरीके का. You can see it's a flat roof. यहाँ पर क्या है कि there is a dome, there is an arch-like structure here. Top of जैसे mosques थे. So the use in the Indo-Islamic architecture, there was a use of domes that became prominent. In the Trebite style, there was the use of shikhara that was prominent, which means it was more on the top of temples, which was generally conical or pyramidal or curvilinear, what we can say. Minars were absent in the Indian architectural style, and in the Indo-Islamic or the arcuate style, the use of minars were present on the four corners of mosques. अब यहाँ पर जो building material use होता था Indian architecture में से पहले, that was primarily stone in almost all constructions. And ये जो arcuate style था, वहाँ पर there was the first cementing material was mortar, that is brick, lime and mortar was used, and lime, plaster and mortar started being used for constructions at this particular point. अब the Indo-Islamic architecture का एक prominent feature ये है कि they avoided the use of human and animal figures, and rather they relied on more of floral designs, or what we can call the arabesque designs, here using the arabesque methods, जहाँ पर they used geometrical ornamentation and vegetal ornamentation, and this was basically, you can see like floral designs that were there. And there was a prominent use of calligraphy as well here in this particular period. So Hindu architecture, ये कहा जाता है कि it had become too congested, while the Indo-Islamic architecture brought massiveness, breadth and spaciousness to the prevailing architecture. So the humans and animals figures were avoided, and they used mostly calligraphy for decoration or more designs. And what we can see is that the architecture of this period imbibed a sense of symmetry in it. And there was a prominent use of jali works, that there was an intricate, the buildings of this particular Indo-Islamic architecture had jali works, जिससे ये पता चलता है कि there was an importance of light that was given in the Islamic religion. So here you can see jali work, ऐसा बहुत जगहों पे देखने के लिए मिलता है इस तरीके का jali work. अब यहाँ पर इस टाइम पर एक important feature था the use of water. तो water जो है, it was there in the premises in the form of pools या small drains या फिर fountains, and water जो है primarily use किया जाता था for decorative purposes, yes, but also for cooling the premises, and apart from that, religious purposes. अब यहाँ पर Islamic rulers introduced the charbagh style of gardening. This is something that we should note. The charbagh style of gardening. जहाँ पर एक स्क्वायर ब्लॉक को दे डिवाइडेड इनटू फोर पार्ट्स एंड फोर एडजेसेंट आइडेंटिकल गार्डन्स. इस तरीके से देयर वर फोर गार्डन्स एंड दिस इज द चारबाग स्टाइल दैट केम through the Islamic rulers. The architecture here at this time also used the pietra dura technique. अब ये pietra dura technique की अगर हम बात करें तो basically this is basically a technique that uses highly polished colored stones, like you can see in this image here. This is the pietra dura technique जहाँ पे they use this highly polished colored stones to create images, and it is a kind of decorative art. And काफी तरह तरह के colored stones, particularly marbles and semi-precious and even precious stones were used. And this technique was used for the inlay of precious stones into these walls इस तरीके से. And here we can see the use of floral designs was very prominent, and calligraphy. ये दो चीजों का use जो है वो बहुत होता था. So basically, if you look at this foresighting technique, this is basically a technique that was generally applied in calligraphy. And जहाँ पर इसका मतलब क्या है, basically foresighting technique में letters ऐसे लिखे जाते हैं कि they do not appear too small when you look at it from far away, and they do not appear too large when you look at it from close by. So this foresighting technique was used in buildings such that the inscriptions that were there appeared of the same size from any particular place. So यहाँ पर you can see calligraphy इस तरीके से was incorporated in the buildings of this time. तो इस particular picture को देख के हम features के बारे में बता सकते हैं कि यहाँ पे there was the use of calligraphy. The Indo-Islamic architecture used calligraphy as a means of decoration, and here we can see the use of pietra dura, the use of floral designs, and what we can see here is that this use of arch, and यहाँ पर जाली देख सकते हैं हम, the use of jali works, जिससे हमें पता चलता है that they gave importance to light. So these are things that we can see from here. Now coming to the architecture during the Delhi Sultanate period. अब Delhi Sultanate period जो है, it lasted from 1206 to 1526 AD and or Common Era, and the imperial style was patronized by the rulers of Delhi, and basically various dynasties ruled in the Delhi Sultanate period, and हर रूलर का अपना अपना स्टाइल था, हर रूलर का अपना अपना स्टाइल था, certain flavors that got incorporated, and basically the entire architecture जो है that evolved. अब slave dynasty की बात करें, सबसे पहले तो slave dynasty आती है, and जिसको इलबारी dynasty भी बुलाया जाता है, and the slave dynasty remained in power from 1206 to 1290, and it was during this period that the architecture this particular form of architecture started, and what we can say is that this also came to be known as the Mamluk style of architecture. पर यहाँ पर क्या होता था इस टाइम पर, mostly the constructions were the remodeling of the Hindu structures that already existed. यहाँ पर काफी सारे monuments का erection जो है वो start हुआ. कुतुब मीनार एक prime example है. कुतुब मीनार basically एक 5-storied structure है जिसका first story जो है that was completed, only the ground floor was done by Qutbuddin Aibak. So it was Qutbuddin Aibak who initiated this. So it is a 5-storied red sandstone tower, Qutub Minar, and इसका जो बाकी के 3 floors हैं, the next 3 stories were completed by Iltutmish, and the 5th story, the last one, was completed later on by Firoz Shah Tughlaq. Right, and so the examples of the architecture at this particular point in the slave dynasty are Quwwatul Islam Mosque in the Qutub Minar premises itself. जो basically this was converted from a Jain temple, and then there is this Arhai Din Ka Jhopda in Ajmer. So that is much about the slave dynasty architecture. Also, one more thing additionally, यहाँ पर Qutub Minar is basically a World Heritage Site, and the Qutub Minar जो है, this derives its name not from Qutubuddin Aibak but from the Sufi saint Khwaja Qutubuddin Bakhtiar Kaki. So the Qutub Minar along and the monuments, that is the Qutub complex, is basically a UNESCO World Heritage Site that was declared in 1993. Anyhow, now coming to the Khilji dynasty. So the Khilji dynasty ruled from 1290 to 1320, and they established this style known as the Seljuk style. And यहाँ पर इस पीरियड पे जो कंस्ट्रक्शंस होते थे वो they were primarily made of red sandstone, and there was this prominence of the arcuate style from this period that we began to see. And इसका एक prominent example है Alai Darwaza by Alauddin Khilji. So this is the Alai Darwaza. I don't know if it's very much visible. So this is within the Qutub complex, and so this Alai Darwaza was by Alauddin Khilji. इस खिलजी डायनास्टी का एक और एग्जाम्पल है, खिलजी डायनास्टी के आर्किटेक्चर का एक और एग्जाम्पल है सिरी फोर्ट. सो अलाई दरवाजा जो है, दिस वाज बिल्ट बाय अलाउद्दीन खिलजी इन 1311, यहाँ पर दिस वन, एंड this was basically a part of his plan to extend the Quwwatul Islam mosque that is here. तो Quwwatul Islam mosque को extend करने का plan था खिलजी का, and he had planned to construct 4 gates, but only the Alai Darwaza could be completed before he died in 1316. So it is basically a southern gateway to the mosque, and it is located at the southern part of the Qutub complex. Then comes the Tughlaq dynasty. अभी तुगलक डायनास्टी में कोई बहुत खास कंस्ट्रक्शन नहीं हुआ था. बेसिकली खास कंस्ट्रक्शन इन द सेंस there was not much of decorated construction that took place. There was construction. The city of Tughlaqabad was constructed. The cities of Jahanpana, Firozabad, all of this was constructed. But ये time जो है Tughlaq dynasty का, it was the crisis period for architecture during the Delhi Sultanate period. कुछ constructions हुए थे, and they used the grey sandstone. And the period यहाँ पर इस time पर the focus was not on design or decoration, but rather the focus was more on strength of the building. And the construction here combined दोनों जो arch method है, the arch method and the lintel method, दोनों को combine किया गया इस time पे, the तुगलक के time पे, तुगलक dynasty के time पे, and for entrance. And they also introduced a style of construction known as batter, जहाँ पर sloping walls दिए गए to enhance the strength of the building. Then comes the Lodi dynasty. So Lodi dynasty के अंदर कोई खास बहुत architecture आगे नहीं बढ़ा. In fact, it continued to remain in the same state, or rather, but यहाँ पर क्या हुआ basically? There was an important feature of architecture that developed during this period. That was the style of that was the introduction of double domes. यहाँ पर basically सिर्फ tombs ही commission किए गए थे in this particular period, and so this double dome में there was a hollow dome inside the top dome. So there was a hollow dome inside a top dome. This is the top dome, and this was basically said to give strength to the structure and to lower the height of the dome. तो इस टाइम पर जो tombs बनाए गए थे, they were not very decorative or anything. They did not have much focus on decoration, and like what happened in the Tughlaq dynasty, and they were supported by a sloping veranda, and the city of Agra was established by Sikandar Lodi. So these are a few examples, and nothing much more about the Lodi dynasty dynasty's architecture. Then this was about the imperial architecture during the Sultanate time, that is the Sultanate architecture. Then comes the architecture in the provincial. Then comes the provincial school of architecture. So very quickly about the provincial schools of architecture. So इस time पे Indo Islamic style जो है that started to influence the other architectural styles as well that were existent at the local levels. Bengal, Jaunpur, Mandu, Bijapur, ये सारे these places became the important seeds of architectural development. Bengal school की अगर हम बात करें तो the Bengal school of architecture was characterized by the use of bricks and black marble. And जो इस time पे mosques थे, they used this bangla roofs, that is the sloping bangla roofs, and जो पहले temples के लिए use किया जाता था, there was something, the term bangla roofs is associated with this. इसका एक एग्जाम्पल है कदम रसूल मॉस्क इन गौर and Adina Mosque in Pandua. So then the other provincial school that also developed at this time was the Malwa school. So basically Malwa school, basically very quickly, Malwa school was prominent because it is one school that also that had the finest specimens of environmental adaptation of this period. It had large windows. Malwa school mein large windows were there. It was lightly arched, and there were artificial reservoirs. There were they were made. The Malwa school ka jo architecture hai, the buildings were made of locally available materials. So this was the this was the finest specimen of environmental adaptation at that point of time. इसमें अलग-अलग color के stones use हुए थे. There was also European influence because the building had large windows. So there was perhaps a European influence, and minars यहाँ पर use नहीं किए गए थे Malwa school में. That is like too much of detail. Anyhow, the examples are Ashrafi Mahal, and there is this Rani Roopmati Pavilion, Jahaz Mahal. All of that is example of Malwa school. Then there is also a Jaunpur school, and that was patronized by the Sharki rulers of Jaunpur, and that became a center of art and cultural activity of that time. तो जौनपुर स्कूल में भी मीनार का यूज नहीं किया गया था. देयर वाज अनदर प्रोविंशियल स्कूल दैट वाज द बीजापुर स्कूल, एंड दैट वाज अंडर द पेट्रनेज ऑफ आदिल शाह. मुगल आर्किटेक्चर की बात करते हैं अब. दिस इज द इम्पोर्टेंट वन, मुगल आर्किटेक्चर. सो मुगल्स were actually great patrons of art and architecture, and it was under the Mughals that architecture regained its importance, and नए नए buildings बनाए गए, and there was a lot of artistic inspiration in those buildings. So Babur starting from Babur did undertake a few constructions, but his reign was too short-lived for any new style to actually develop. He did undertake certain constructions of a few mosques here and there, like in Rohilkhand and in Panipat. Humayun's reign was marked with a constant power struggle, and that power struggle was with Sher Shah Suri. And तो इस टाइम पे उतना फोकस नहीं हो पाया on art and architecture in Humayun's time. However, he laid the foundation of the city named Dinpana, but उसको finish नहीं कर पाया था वो. So then comes Sher Shah, and it was during the reign of Sher Shah that the Grand Trunk Road was constructed, and Sher Shah undertook the construction of Qila-e Kuhuna Mosque, and also he had a tomb, and also the construction of his tomb at Sasaram. सो ये जो ट्रेडिशंस थे, कंस्ट्रक्शन अंडर शेर शाह वेंट इन अकॉर्डेंस विथ जो दिल्ली सल्तनत के पीरियड में चल रहा था, उसी के हिसाब से इसके टाइम पर भी चला. बट इट वाज आफ्टर द असेंट ऑफ अकबर टू द थ्रोन इन 1556 दैट मुगल आर्ट एंड आर्किटेक्चर का असली गोल्डन पीरियड जो है वो स्टार्ट हुआ. अकबर के अंडर काफी कुछ डेवलपमेंट हुआ एंड द प्रिंसिपल feature of the constructions during the time of Akbar was the use of red sandstone. अब the prominent works undertaken in Akbar's reign are एक तो आगरा फोर्ट. It was so आगरा फोर्ट का कंस्ट्रक्शन जो है अकबर के टाइम पे स्टार्ट हुआ, पर ज्यादातर स्ट्रक्चर्स जो हैं इनसाइड द फोर्ट वो शाहजहां के टाइम पे बिल्ड हुए. जैसे कि देयर इज अ मोती मस्जिद दैट वाज मेड बाय शाहजहां. There is a hall of public audience that is Diwan-e-Aam that was also built by Shah Jahan. Diwan-e-Khas that is hall for private audience that was again by Shah Jahan. So ये सारी चीजें हैं इसमें, but it was started. The Agra fort construction started during the reign of Akbar. Okay, and there is also a Sheesh Mahal and the Jahangiri Mahal here, and the gardens inside the fort here are built in the Charbagh style. We saw what is the Charbagh style. Up next is Fatehpur Sikri, one of the highlights of the Indo-Islamic architecture. Creation of a new capital city by Akbar at Fatehpur Sikri. So this was one of the highlights of this Indo-Islamic architecture. अब ये जो बिल्डिंग्स हैं यहाँ पर they represent a blend of Hindu and Persian styles, and कुछ important architecture इसके अंदर हैं, जैसे कि बुलंद दरवाजा. There is a बुलंद दरवाजा inside the sacred complex of Fatehpur Sikri. I mean the darwaza that leads to the Fatehpur Sikri. Then there is a Panch Mahal and Panch Mahal, and then Jodha Bai's palace is there, and then there is also the tomb of Sheikh Salim Chishti here, and also there is an Ibadat Khana jahan par Akbar used to meet the leaders of different religions here. इसके अलावा there is also a temple that Akbar had got constructed at Vrindavan, and that is a temple of Govind Dev. अब next आता है जहांगीर. तो जहांगीर की अगर हम बात करें तो जहांगीर के टाइम पे आर्किटेक्चर में बहुत ही ज्यादा कोई डेवलपमेंट नहीं हुआ था. आर्किटेक्चर टुक अ बैक सीट, and जहांगीर बेसिकली फोकस्ड मोर ऑन पेंटिंग्स. हालांकि कुछ चीजें हैं जो जहांगीर के टाइम पे बनी थी, जैसे कुछ मॉन्यूमेंट, जैसे कि अकबर्स टूम्ब इन सिकंदरा, उसका खुद का टूम्ब उसने बनवाया जहांगीर ने. he also built his own tomb at Lahore, and then शालीमार बाग, बहुत सारे gardens भी बने इसके टाइम पे. that is one prominent one is the शालीमार बाग in Kashmir, and he also built the Moti Masjid at Lahore. इसके अलावा जहांगीर के रेन में उसकी his wife was Noor Jahan, and she undertook the construction of her father's tomb, that is the tomb of Idmad-ud-Dawla, and it was during this time that white marble became the chief building material, and that replaced the red sandstone जो अभी तक यूज हो रहा था. अकबर के रेन में, बाय द वे, अकबर के Humayun's tomb was built in the reign of Akbar. Then comes Shah Jahan's reign, and it is in the reign of Shah Jahan that Mughal architecture अपने climax पे पहुंच गया. It was Shah Jahan's reign is said to be the climax of Mughal architecture, and some of his very prominent works, of course, Taj Mahal तो सबको ही पता है. Taj Mahal was constructed in the memory of Mumtaz Mahal, and उसमें There was use of calligraphy, there was Pietradura's works, foresighting technique, charbagh style gardens, everything that we saw in the beginning, that was all employed in Taj Mahal. Jali work, all of that. Apart from that, Red Fort was constructed by Shah Jahan, Jama Masjid in Delhi, Shalimar Bagh in Lahore. Jahangir ke time pe Shalimar Bagh in Kashmir was made, but it was under Shah Jahan that Shalimar Bagh in Lahore was constructed, like the garden was made, Shalimar Bagh, Lahore, and the city of Shah Jahanabad was also made. And इसके अलावा there was also a very prominent throne, that is a peacock throne, और इसको माना जाता है as one of the finest examples of metal work of this particular period, that is the peacock throne. And ये भी शाहजहां के टाइम पे आया था. औरंगजेब के टाइम पे कुछ नहीं हुआ बेसिकली. रेन ऑफ औरंगजेब में जो मुगल आर्किटेक्चर है वो पूरी तरह से डिक्लाइन हो गया, एंड ही डिड नॉट टेक एनी इंटरेस्ट इन आर्ट एंड आर्किटेक्चर. Nothing very prominent. So the last of the Mughals who actually did some amount of construction or got something constructed was the son of Aurangzeb. So he got the Bibi Ka Maqbara constructed in memory of his mother, Rabia Durrani, that who was the wife of Aurangzeb basically, and this is situated in Aurangabad, and it has been described to be a blind imitation of Taj Mahal basically, and he also built the Zenat Mahal in Delhi in memory of his wife. इसके अलावा there were Mughal period में two more styles of architecture developed, one in Rajasthan and one in Punjab. So the sixth style of architecture basically, there is nothing very significant that we have to know from here apart from that कि यहाँ पर multiple छतरीज का use किया गया. One example is the Golden Temple, जिसको हरमिंदर साहिब भी बुलाया जाता है, that was initiated by Guru Ramdas and completed by Arjun Dev. And Rajput style में, or the style in Rajasthan, there was also an influence of the Mughal style that was visible, and but इसमें कुछ unique चीजें थी, and they introduced the concept of hanging balcony. Okay, and it was in the Rajput style that the concept of hanging balcony was introduced. इसके अलावा there's nothing much prominent that we have to know about the medieval architecture.